He had a real name. It was on maps and official documents. Each village had its own name, and ours too. But it didn't matter. No one ever used it. At least no one is important, just strangers. For us, it was just a village. It was our whole world. Usually, the only way to enter it is to be born here, and the only way to leave it forever is to die. Of course, we had heard of other places, but we were too isolated to know much about them. I have often wondered what life is like in places not filled with hatred and contempt, places that aren't as damp and dark and cold as this. Why was I unlucky enough to be born into this hellhole in the big lottery of life? Some of us visited other places, but I was not one of them, and those who were did not talk about it. Carla and I lived in one of the smaller, less prestigious houses. Reflecting our social status in the village, it could even be called wretched. I returned home thinking about how my feelings for him had changed. This was once my sanctuary, a place just for Carla and me. It was small, but big enough to hold us and our love for each other. Those days are long gone. The tender feelings we experienced inside the house created an aura around it. It disappeared a long time ago. Now it was just a small, miserable house. I was no longer looking forward to returning home and sighed as I opened the door. Carla sat in her favorite place by the window, as usual. As I expected, she had a book in her hands. She was dressed in the most unattractive things she wore when she was alone or only I was around. It was as if she was making herself as unattractive as possible in my presence. But this time there was something different. She actually looked at me. She hasn't done this in quite some time. I would have been glad of such a new development if her gaze had not been so cold and expectant. No, not wait and see. Was she watching me? Were you afraid of me? I had no idea and realized again how little I knew my wife. Whatever it was, her gaze was strange. We looked at each other for what seemed like an eternity. Why was she looking at me like that? Gabriel is dead. This should have been shocking news, but she said it like it was the most normal thing in the world. I was waiting to see if there would be a sequel, but apparently there won't be. She just kept looking at me, judging me, studying me. I should have been shocked by how calm she looked, but I wasn't. Gabriel is dead. Carla wasn't particularly shocked, but to be honest, neither was I. Rationally, I knew I should have felt something. Common decency demanded it, even if Gabriel and I hadn't been that close lately. Instead of experiencing emotions, I simply remembered several episodes from my life. It seems that this stocky, bearded giant has always been nearby. I spent my childhood and youth under his roof, and he taught and guided me like a father. But he never let me forget that he was not my real father. I didn't remember my real parents, only Gabriel. Annetta, his wife, tolerated me in her usual cold and distant way, and always made it clear that she was only doing this on her husband's orders. The words "mom" and "dad" were strictly prohibited. He turned me into a broken, doubting person. He fed and sheltered me, but I still bore the physical and mental scars he left me. I knew I should have felt something from his death. Grief, loss, compassion, relief, joy, jubilation. I felt nothing but mild surprise that he was truly mortal. Gabriel was a tough man. He demanded at least everything that a person could give, and he achieved it ruthlessly. He was strict with himself, but he was downright cruel with others. He broke people until they obeyed his will. Carla was still looking at me intently, not moving. "Nothing to say?" she finally asked, trying to appear unconcerned about it all. "How did he die?" I asked, mainly to say something and not out of special interest. She looked at me with an "as if you don't know" expression, but answered anyway. "Head is broken." I simply nodded, only slightly interested. It didn't matter. Rationally, I knew that his death would radically change my life, but I couldn't find it in myself to care. I got up and went to her. She shuddered and cowered, as if she was afraid of me. It confused me, but not enough to really think about it. Her feelings no longer had anything to do with me. Our marriage was arranged between Gabriel and her father, and no one bothered to ask our opinion. We never talked about it, but I thought Carla was at least happy for a while. The warmth we showed each other warmed my heart and made our house a home. I hoped it would turn into love, but maybe that was just wishful thinking. Perhaps I was too impatient for the happy family I never had as a child, so I avoided looking too closely at things. Who did it? You seem surprisingly calm about this, Simon. As often as not, she completely ignored my question, but I realized that she was right. Gabriel. It seemed that my whole life somehow revolved around him. It was as if he had always been some kind of giant, dominating my life, not just physically. There were times when I adored him and trusted him completely. I gave him everything I had, craving the slightest nod of approval from him. No matter what I did, it was never enough. All I got was indifference when I did something well, or punishment when I didn't. There were also times when I hated him. My blood boiled every time I saw him. My skin crawled every time I heard his voice. He knew. He always knew, one way or another. He didn't care. I think he liked it when my hatred flowed off him like water off a duck, showing me how completely helpless I was. He could destroy me at any moment if he wanted, and we both knew it. So, finally, the bastard is dead. I might be sad because I lost the only father figure I had. I could be over the moon to get rid of the person I hated the most. Instead, I felt nothing, only slight dissatisfaction with my own lack of response. Yes, I said. There's no point in pouring out your soul in front of Carla. It seemed like I hardly knew her anymore. This was the longest conversation we've had in a long time. The whole village wasn't particularly talkative, but Carla and I took it to the extreme. She looked at me silently, and I wondered if she regretted what happened between us. If so, it wouldn't matter. As with Gabriel, there was a time when I adored her. Later, there was a time when I hated her. Lately, I've only felt empty indifference. She was still here, but Gabrielle was not. That was the only difference. "Do you know who did this?" she asked. I knew what she was thinking and had to recognize her ability to maintain a neutral, non-accusatory tone. She was still talking like she was talking about the weather. No. Simon. Her facade suddenly cracked, and something akin to sympathy broke through. Simon, we all know there's some history between me and Gabriel. Yes, she was right. Something happened, and we all knew. The whole village knew. Gabriel took care of it. So you think that was the reason I killed him? Simon. After all this time, I realized that I would also like to know the answer to this question. Yes, my hatred has long passed, so could I kill him if I had the opportunity? She didn't answer right away, just stared at me again. The other men are there to view the body. Will you go? Again, she ignored my question and changed the subject until the cracks in her calm grew larger. But for a short time, I saw a real person. This weakness disappeared as suddenly as if she had put on a mask. Yes. I sighed, not really wanting to go back out into the rain to examine the body of the only father I knew. Not being present might raise questions, so I put on my old boots and poor jacket again. I knew the weather would be bad, but I was still looking forward to the few minutes of solitude that the walk would bring. I didn't particularly like being alone, and I certainly didn't like hard work in the forest, but I didn't like most of the villagers even more. While I was getting dressed, Carla's eyes never left mine. I'm missing something, she was looking for something, and then it dawned on me. I didn't know where the body was, and she wondered if I would ask. I was definitely a suspect in her eyes, and I couldn't blame her. In my eyes, I was also a suspect. Where? I finally asked, breaking the tension. He was lying on his back, almost as if he was sleeping. It had been raining for several days, and the ground was wet and muddy. The men from the village gathered around him, Felix and Lucas holding torches. No one moved, no one spoke. Everyone looked at me as if I held the answer to this riddle. They were all once neighbors, family, my whole world. Now I was a stranger, a suspect. It was clear that they didn't trust me. I should have felt bad, but I didn't care. I didn't trust myself either. For some reason, I suddenly remembered the day he taught me how to chop wood. Patiently, he showed how to hold the axe. I remembered his large, looming figure behind me as he showed me how to do it, guiding my hands. I enjoyed the feeling of security when he cared for me, taught me, and generally acted like a father. I felt a burning need to please him, to do everything right. I felt another burning sensation a few minutes later, this time on my cheek when I missed a tree. He continued to hit me until I fell to the ground. His sudden mood swings and his general unpredictability were hard to bear for the boy, who was desperate to please him enough to perhaps be accepted as a true son one day. Of course, there were good days. We were mending the fence together, and it was a nice summer day. He even asked if I wanted to help him, and I immediately agreed. We worked all day like a well-oiled machine. Late in the evening, we suddenly realized that we were finished. Sweaty and dirty, we rejoiced and hugged each other. It was wonderful, one of the best days of my life. We achieved something together. I gained his respect and felt like I had taken a huge step towards becoming his true son. Of course, it didn't last long, and the bruises I received the next day showed it. I came back to reality. Apparently, no one dared to touch him or even take a closer look at him. The ground next to him was untouched. It was as if these cowards were still afraid of him, just like I was just recently. No one would seriously think about involving outsiders in this matter. We have never included outsiders in our affairs, and I did not expect that to change. Apparently, I was the only one willing to do something and didn't have a better idea, so I decided to take a closer look. "One hit, straight to the head," I said, pretending to know what I was talking about. I began to examine the body even closer, mainly because it seemed like the right thing to do and no one else wanted to do it. I looked around, seeing a semicircle of uncertainty. They were not used to this, they went with the flow. They were used to Gabriel telling them what to do, what to think, what to believe, like mindless puppets. Systematic cruelty drilled this into them. Many of them looked at the body as if in a last attempt to gain the guidance that had suddenly been taken away from them. They were free for the first time in their miserable lives, and they didn't realize it yet. Heck, they probably won't even appreciate it when they figure it out. They were so devoted to their cruel master that they wanted to obey him even after his death. I didn't despise them, I pitied them. When they finally looked away from the dead ruler, they looked at me warily. Gender, for example, bastard. When we were kids, he spent years gaining my trust. We spent time together often, taking every opportunity to escape the strict schedule of responsibilities that this creep had imposed on us. We were young boys, and a certain amount of silliness and boundary testing was inevitable. The little pranks we tried seemed absurdly harmless in retrospect, and yet, now the dead giant was always one step ahead of us. Sometimes he was gracious enough to let us leave with something, more often he wasn't. When he didn't allow it, my punishment was always especially cruel. I had to sit in the hole for several days. I suffered countless beatings. I was publicly humiliated. He said that he was especially strict with me because I was his boy, and it was for my own good. Bastard. How he always knew what was going on remained a mystery until Gabriel himself told me that Paul had been his informant all along. Who sends a spy into a group of little boys? How paranoid and controlling should a person be? Paul was looking at me now, looking scared. Maybe he thought this was his chance to get the others to lynch me before I could kill him, now that Gabriel was no longer protecting him. As if I would have the slightest interest in this. He was as weak as the others and not worth the effort. "Simon," he began, surprising me. Like the others, he was not one to talk without reason. "What?" I answered sharply, causing him to flinch and take a step back. "Let's meet at my house later and talk about business," Felix suggested softly, and no one objected. To my surprise, everyone was waiting for my approval, and after I nodded slightly, the matter was resolved. Felix's house has long served as a makeshift meeting room and pub. Carla was waiting for me at home, which was unusual for me. Her eyes never left mine again, but this time they were more sympathetic and open. I had no idea what was going on in her head and didn't feel the need to find out. Instead, I wondered if this is how most marriages work. "Simon, I know things haven't been easy between us lately," she said softly. "Really? What do you mean, Carla? We seem to get along great. I replied in a neutral tone and knew the sarcasm was not lost on her. She tried to appear calm, although it was clearly not easy for her. She was clearly on some kind of mission, I just didn't know which one. Simon. She began, but seemed to be at a loss for words. I never had a choice. You know that. Is it true? I didn't believe it for a second, but my tone remained neutral. Simon. You may not know it, but he was afraid of you. Is it true? Again, I doubted it. Yes, it may not have seemed like it to you, but you were the only one who dared to stand up to him. You're right, I didn't think so. You were his boy, he wanted to forge you as his successor, who would continue his work after him. But you did not give in. Instead, you were a constant source of irritation for him. Then even his punishments stopped reaching you. I think he was using me to change that. Yes, forge me is the euphemism of the century. The beating was definitely included in the kit. I don't see why it's important now. I replied, as I still wasn't interested in discussing it. Simon, I couldn't, and no one else could, she interrupted me, unexpectedly passionate. Couldn't what? Confront him. I see. So your excuse now is that you were powerless, you were forced. Stop, she interrupted me sharply. Let's not talk about what happened. Ever. Why not? He's dead. It doesn't matter. It's in the past. There was too much pain already. That's for sure. I don't see why. That's enough. I talked to the others. We all agreed never to talk about it again. All the women in the village agreed. No one will ever mention it. You won't be humiliated. Never. The husbands won't laugh. It never happened. That's very thoughtful of you. Please, no sarcasm now. I know our marriage hasn't been easy. I know we haven't shared a bed in years, but it's not too late for us. It's not too late to make things right. We're still young, and once upon a time we were happy. Yes, everyone knew whose bed she had shared all these years. What she told me didn't change anything. Nobody ever talked about these things out loud anyway. Nobody laughed. We were a good moral village. Bad things happened behind closed doors, mostly from one person, but talking about them was an absolute taboo. It seemed okay to do them as long as your name was Gabriel. He didn't even have to be too secretive. As long as everyone had the opportunity to turn away and pretend nothing was happening, that was enough. The problem was that the body was now lying in plain sight. I wondered if anyone would actually dare investigate a murder that couldn't be hidden, couldn't be swept under the rug. I wasn't even sure if anyone would have the courage to directly ask me if I killed him. They should, since I clearly had a motive to kill the bastard. It will be interesting. Let's go to the meeting, I said in an unusually commanding tone, and instead of ripping my head off, Carla simply nodded obediently. As expected, all the adults were present, as this was the most life-changing event that had ever happened in this hellhole. I didn't know what to expect. A mob eager to lynch me, an avalanche of accusations, a weeping widow, daughter, and mistress, or a greedy mass of people hungry for any kind of excitement. None of this happened. A feeling of uncertainty prevailed. They really looked at me as a leader, which seemed inappropriate since I was the main suspect. Having a leader turned out to be more important than morality. I shouldn't have been surprised. What now? Lucas asked, looking at me and clearly not expecting to get the right answer, but just to start a discussion. I looked at Annetta, Gabriel's wife, and her 19-year-old daughter Lee. Neither of them seemed particularly grieving, but they looked at me just as intently as Carla. This irritated me a little. Why weren't they angry? Why didn't anyone accuse me? How could they crown the regicide so coldly? I suddenly felt contempt for them. What? I practically screamed, causing them to flinch. Why are you all looking at me? All eyes suddenly dropped to the floor. Only Annetta, always the tough and closed Annetta, continued to look at me with her usual subtle smile. I always suspected that somewhere under her hard and unfeeling shell there was a hard and unfeeling core. From a distance, she was quite attractive. Tall, slender, and blonde, there was nothing not to love about her. The closer you got, the tougher she seemed. Her entire face was dominated by sharp, hard lines. It matched her cold gray eyes and her overall personality. Lee inherited her mother's tall and slender body, but her facial features were softened by Gabriel's genes. She was conceived by two unattractive and not particularly physically attractive people, but the result was quite attractive. We just thought. Felix began, but was lost for words. What? You thought what? Why are we even here? I demanded an answer. I realized that I wanted the accusations to begin. I wanted them to expose the hypocrisy of the village. I wanted to reveal all their misdeeds, all their cowardice. Nothing. I didn't receive anything. What? I started again, my voice still too loud for the small room. They looked at me so infuriatingly obedient. Yeah, now that the big boss is dead, I found my voice, I thought, and I hated myself a little for it. The silence lasted for an eternity of several seconds. Simon, we were afraid this might happen again, Felix said. I almost laughed. Finding out who killed Gabriel was clearly not a top priority. It was easy to prevent this. Gabriel was dead and would never return. Simon, one of us has been killed, Maria said. She rarely spoke at all, so it was not only me who was surprised. Right. I think the first question should be what exactly happened. Agree. Maybe you can tell us. Wait, maybe we should all tell you what we did last night. Everyone hummed in approval, but no one suggested what they were doing. Everyone looked at me instead. Well, I was with Carla last night. It was a blatant lie, and Carla was there to tell everyone about it. The last thing I remember from the previous night was that I was alone in our house and starting to get seriously drunk while Carla was somewhere, probably with Gabriel. I didn't remember a damn thing after that moment. It was a pity. While I didn't care enough about him to actually enjoy the killing, I would still prefer to know the truth. All I knew was that I wasn't home, and neither was Carla. She was probably playing the role of the second, young and impatient wife again, and I assumed that Annetta was sleeping in their guest room. Everyone knew about it, no one talked about it, and Annetta tolerated it without the slightest disruption to her iconic thin smile. I assumed that Annetta, tough and practical as she was, didn't miss the intimacy with Gabriel and accepted it as long as people were superficially secretive and she remained the big man's wife. This is how things worked in our village. Annetta accepted that her husband slept with others for power. So why did I take it? Did I ever accept it, or was I just powerless to do anything about it? Did I finally pluck up the courage and find the motivation to do something last night? Have I finally looked at the problem I've been avoiding looking at for so long? Again, I wanted to know the answer. Carla began, but didn't know how to continue. Admitting that she spent the night with Gabriel would make her a suspect. Even worse, it would publicly identify her as an adulteress. I admired the moral code of the village again. Cheating was common, knowledge of it was highly coveted, speaking about it publicly was a mortal sin. Right, she concluded simply, interrupting my thoughts about our particular brand of hypocrisy. I spent the night at our house with Simon. Everyone nodded vigorously, glad to be spared the need to hear the truth. Everyone has learned the art of hypocrisy very well. Gabriel left many hints. Sometimes he openly boasted of his betrayal. Everyone took it as a bad joke and laughed or completely ignored it. Okay, Felix breathed a sigh of relief. So Simon and Carla were home. Who else could have done this? I guess everyone else was home with their loved ones, right? He looked around, practically forcing everyone to agree. Everyone nodded their heads. Damn hypocrites, myself included. I knew of at least 2 other long-term relationships, and I was willing to bet not everyone was home last night. I was pretty sure Carla wasn't the only wife Gabriel slept with. The satisfied mood did not last long. Yes, it was established that there are only good moral people in the village. There was only one small speck the body that was difficult to ignore. Someone had to do it. It was interesting to see everyone looking around for a solution. "Where's Stoney?" asked one of the wives for no apparent reason. We didn't know if his name was actually Stoney. He was an exception to the rule that no one ever came to the village. He came from outside and bought an old abandoned house near the river. I didn't know how he got his name. As far as I knew, he never mentioned his present. Maybe it was because of his overwhelming grayness, maybe because of his stone face. He kept his distance from us, just as his house kept his distance from the village. He did not work. He bought what he needed from us, which was not much. He was just like a vague presence in the back of our minds. His presence was a bit unsettling as no one knew why he was there or what he was doing all day. He has been the source of countless stories and speculation, making him everything from an escaped criminal to an evil sorcerer or undead. Yeah, what about Stony? Felix got excited. I felt the mood change. The confused group suddenly turned into a determined crowd. Wait, he never cared about what was happening. I tried, but was interrupted by Annetta. Stony, she screamed with excitement. I've known her all my life, and I've never seen her excited before. Let's go see him, shall we? No one bothered to come up with a good reason for him to kill Gabriel. It just didn't matter. He was a convenient scapegoat, and at that moment that was all they needed. Yes, he was an eccentric, but that was not enough to lynch him. However, everyone was already on their way, and I followed them to prevent the worst. Okay, and out of curiosity. The icy November rain and muddy trail had cooled everyone down considerably, and as we stood in front of his house, the group had mostly returned to the hesitant and helpless herd I had seen earlier. Everyone looked at each other, waiting for someone to take the lead. After a while, most of them turned to me, but I just shook my head. I was here to prevent the worst, not to lead them. Finally, Felix came forward and knocked on Stony's old door. "Stony!" he exclaimed weakly and idiotically added, "Come out, we just want to talk to you." To my surprise, the door actually opened, creaking accordingly. Stony came out and earned my respect with his incredible equanimity. He even grinned at them a little contemptuously, which I had not seen before. "What?" he asked in a sharp tone. "What do you need?" Felix and the others were clearly hoping for a trembling and pleading victim, not a confident old man. We know what you did," Felix managed. "Oh, I see. So what is this?" "You killed Gabriel," Felix shouted, surprising everyone except Stony with his directness. I knew that Felix hated Gabriel just as much as I did, although for completely different reasons. His accusation seemed a little bogus to me. "Gabriel?" Stony asked, as if trying to remember who Felix was talking about. "Are you kidding?" Felix shouted. "Our beloved leader." He said this without a hint of irony, which for some reason impressed me. "Oh, that Gabriel. You mean the big, sadistic bastard who killed your father, Felix? The village needed a new leader then. Gabriel and your father agreed to fight to the death, if necessary. Your father was fast and cunning. He really thought he could do it. You were too young to remember, but Gabriel almost killed him right before your eyes. Is it that beloved leader you mean?" Silence. Shocked silence, indeed. Long faces, mostly looking at dirty shoes. Not mine, however. I was intrigued and watched him more closely. Stony was no stranger, that much was clear. Not at all. He knew something about our village that none of us suspected. Well, at least I never suspected. Maybe some of the elders knew, but following the usual way of dealing with the truth, no one ever spoke about it. Stony apparently didn't feel the need to show the same restraint. I noticed the confused look on Felix's downcast face. Seriously, did Felix know about this? He knew that Gabriel killed his father and still bowed to him later. What kind of a wuss was this guy? This thought was unpleasant, since I also had not fought Gabriel since my wife started sleeping with him. I suddenly asked myself what exactly happened to my own parents. Everyone was just talking about the accident without going into details. What was the history of this village? Was everything we had based on the law of the strongest? We all bowed down to the killer. Why did Gabriel take me under his wing like a son? Why did my generation have so many orphans anyway? "Felix?" I simply asked and stared at him like most of the others. Suddenly, we had another suspect. The looks around me said it all, but again, no one openly accused him. To do so would tarnish Gabriel's memory, and whoever did it would claim to have faith in the village more than in the honesty and morality of the villagers, and worse, in their sacred Gabriel. The tension was thick enough to cut with a knife, and the last thing I expected to hear was laughter. However, this is what happened. We all turned to the source and saw Stony with tears in his eyes, laughing heartily. In my mind, I heard Gabriel's roaring laugh too. The old man laughed at us, exposing what hypocrites we were. I just turned around and left, laughter burning behind me. A quick glance showed that the others were following me. Damn, that was awkward. Everyone went home, having had their fill of excitement for the day. The lynching will have to be postponed. Do you want to sleep in our bedroom again, Simon? I didn't think about it, but I guess it was inevitable. Carla was a weak woman. She always was. She could not resist the huge, powerful, but rather unattractive and cruel Gabriel. Now that he was gone, I should have expected her to start offering herself to me again. It would have been more convincing if she didn't look so damn scared of me. I was still her prime suspect in Gabriel's murder. On the other hand, being afraid of someone didn't stop her from sleeping with Gabriel. Maybe this was what she was looking for. In any case, he was dead, so my wife obviously decided that she was mine again. No, don't worry, everything is fine, I answered as gently as possible. I wish I could say she was disappointed, but she clearly looked relieved. Did she think I killed Gabriel, and now it's her turn? I still wasn't sure about the first one, but I was confident enough that I wouldn't do the second one. She just didn't evoke the right emotions in me anymore. On the other hand, I was thinking the same thing about Gabriel, and he was clearly dead, probably by my hand. Everyone just assumes that they know themselves. I used to think so too. Now I didn't have that confidence, and I certainly didn't like it. I was pretty sure that no one would mind if I started behaving completely unpredictably. This was one of the cornerstones of Gabriel's reign. They were used to it, and might even have expected it. The problem was that I would object. As usual, I went to my small bedroom and heard Carla go to hers. I heard the click of her lock. This was new. I continued listening for a while, half expecting her to move the closet to her door. I couldn't blame her for not trusting me, since I didn't trust myself. I woke up early, even earlier than usual. Gabriel tormented me again in my dreams, taunting and laughing. The only way to avoid it was to wake up, so that's what I did. It was still dark outside. The whole village was absolutely silent, as if only I lived in it, and I liked it. I got dressed and went out. The ice prick surprised me a little. The previous days had been cool but mostly wet. Everything was wet or dirty, and it all froze overnight. Walking across the crisp layer of ice, I suddenly wondered if anyone had bothered to remove Gabriel's body. I couldn't work in the forest under these conditions, so I decided to take a look. Dawn was slowly beginning to come, and it seemed that the day would be bright and sunny. Not a single soul was in sight, but I still imagined that I could feel their gaze on my back, from their hiding places, outside their windows, as I walked towards my slain enemy. As I expected, he was still there. A thin layer of ice covered him, and he seemed to sink even deeper into the frozen ground. Maybe it was just wishful thinking. I wondered how we could move him and bury him, and realized that I didn't really care what happened to his body. For anyone who cares, scavengers might eat it. I just stared at it for a few minutes, trying to come to terms with the fact that it really wasn't there. Subconsciously, I expected him to suddenly jump up and demand something or hit someone. No, he was dead. He will never be a part of my life again, no matter what happens next, at least not physically. He will probably always be present in my dreams and in the back of my mind. No matter what I did, I always found myself wondering if it would be good enough for Gabriel. I despised it, but I was pretty sure it would haunt me for the rest of my life. "Here we are, Gabriel," I said, surprising myself. "You made me and you broke me." Yes, he did it. I heard Felix's voice behind me. I didn't turn around in surprise or even flinch. I would do it if it were Gabriel. I'd probably even turn for Carla. But Felix? He was nothing. Yes, that was the best description of him. He was nothing, no one. Even physically, he was a small, inconspicuous man without any notable features. Gabriel broke it too, and he was either much more careful with it or Felix was much more brittle. Not just me, I replied. I briefly thought about simply ignoring him, but decided against it and turned to face him. Not because I respected him, but because I pitied him and just ignoring people was too much like Gabriel. No, not just you. We continued to stand in silence. Looking at Gabriel brought no new insights, but it seemed inappropriate to just walk away. I realized that this was our funeral. The funeral for Gabriel and the man I once was. Do you know how your parents died? Felix interrupted my mood. I now wished I could ignore him and do it now. There are several rumors about this. Stop, Felix, I demanded sharply, turning around. He obeyed immediately. I wondered why I stopped him. Didn't I really want to find out what happened to my parents? No. Even if I wanted to, all he could offer were rumors, and in this village, rumors were even less reliable than lies presented as facts. Felix looked at me like a frightened 5-year-old boy awaiting punishment. No, he didn't kill Gabriel. The man was a wreck. Damn, that made me the prime suspect again. We both had a motive, but only I seemed capable of carrying it out. The problem was, how was I physically able to do this? Gabriel would have torn me to pieces even if I was sober, which I clearly wasn't. I was the second largest and strongest man in the village, but Gabriel was much stronger than me. Go home, Felix. He's dead, and he's not coming back. He looked at the body warily, clearly unconvinced. The others want to talk again, Simon. Others, certainly. He was simply asking on behalf of a friend how he called me to a meeting. Of course, let's go. Again, all the relevant people were gathered. To my surprise, even Carla was there. I assumed she was still sleeping. I obviously knew nothing more about her life. Again, I was the last one to enter, and again, everyone looked at me expectantly. What? I asked, sounding more like Gabriel than I was comfortable with. The problem was that this herd of stupid sheep was starting to annoy me. Is this how Gabriel perceived us? Simon, Annetta surprised me by speaking. Gabriel is dead. Nothing new there. He wasn't perfect, of course, but he was, let's say, important for our village. Yes, he was the brain you don't have, I thought. Simon, Lucas continued, someone has to make the decisions here. I was surprised how much I despised his weak tone. I looked around and saw only weakness. Why have I never seen this? I could almost understand Gabriel's contempt. So, what do you want? I asked sharply. Simon, you are the only natural leader among us, Lucas continued. I looked at Felix, and although he was clearly not happy, he remained silent. Yes, someone has to decide what to do with the body, Paul added. What a bunch of idiots. Well, what are your options, you idiots? Do you want to stuff it and keep it as a decoration? Or do you want to bury it properly? Bury, muttered the majority. See, it wasn't that hard. Wait until the ice melts a little in the afternoon, then do it. All the men will help. Everyone nodded, glad to have guidance, even on such an obvious matter. There was a power vacuum that I felt like I was being pulled into to fill, which made me angry. Is this how Gabriel felt? Simon, Annetta continued. I wondered how she could be so friendly to me when she must have assumed that I had killed her husband. You and Carla can move into Gabriel's house if you want. It's the biggest and most beautiful house. As long as you agree, Lee and I will continue to live here. What was she saying? Did she expect me to share her bed? Did she expect me to treat her badly and ignore her like Gabriel did? What was happening, I asked myself, looking at Carla and Annetta, unsuccessfully trying to smile at me invitingly. Only Lee seemed to have a brain in her head, looking as disgusted as I felt. I thought about teasing them about the unsolved murder, but decided not to push my luck. I'll think about it, I replied and returned to my own house, Carla following me. The breakfast at home that followed that meeting was delicious. I couldn't remember the last time Carla did something like that for me, but at that moment she seemed ready to satisfy my every need. I tried to enjoy it, but every time I looked at her, I couldn't help but remember that traumatic scene when I first found them in our former marital bed. Gabriel's huge, muscular body was on top of her, obviously having sex for his own pleasure without really caring about her. I knew Carla preferred a slower, gentle pace, but underneath it she seemed content. I was still standing in the doorway, shocked, when they finally noticed me. They looked at me in surprise, but he quickly started grinning. I understood everything immediately. It wasn't just about sex. In Carla's case, it was about power, prestige, and being desired. In Gabriel's case, it was about dominance. He needed me to see it. This was no accident, it was a setup. The sex was just a bonus, at least for him. After standing there for a while, feeling as helpless as I was, I finally heard his voice. "Why don't you wait outside while I finish with your beautiful wife, boy?" he growled. She didn't add anything and just looked at me with interest. I quickly went through my options and found nothing. He could have simply killed me or banished me from the village, which would have had the same effect. Of course, scenes of me killing him flashed before my eyes, but with the support of the entire village, it seemed like suicide. I knew he wanted it, and I knew it was a sign of weakness, of submission, but I had no choice but to run away. His grin turned into a laugh that burned behind me. She joined in with her usual giggle. I returned to the safety of the forest and spent the night in my hut. My return home was shameful and controversial, but Carla acted as if nothing had happened, even though her disrespect for me seemed to grow. My life has always been hell, but it passed through different phases. What followed was another phase. Physically, Gabriel mostly left me alone. It seemed like it was enough for him to dominate me while having sex with my wife. Mentally, the next few years were the hardest time of my life. They no longer hid their relationship from me. On the contrary, their betrayals were as public as the rules of our village allowed. I had always been Gabriel's most rebellious subject, but he finally broke me. Other than immediately moving out of our bedroom, there was nothing I could do. The concept of divorce was unknown in the village, but no one could stop me from living with her as a roommate from then on. For a while, I hoped it would have some effect on her, but there was no sign of it. This made it even more convenient for them since they could use our bedroom even when I was home. In my mind, we were divorced from that moment on. I wish I could say that my ex-wife's actions didn't affect me, but it took a while for me to actually reach that point. After the meeting and subsequent breakfast, I went to the lake and sat on a large rock, looking at the water without seeing it. I knew that Carla would be waiting for me in our small house, trying to revive our marriage. She'll start by pretending nothing happened, that we've always had a great marriage, and play the role of the caring, devoted wife. Denial like this was the most common strategy in the village. I could just go home and join her masquerade and enjoy her purely physically. I even had permission from the villagers to move into Gabriel's much larger and more beautiful house. In short, they expected me to become the new Gabriel. All the privileges, all the power, all the easy life. All I had to do was say yes. The thought made me feel sick. What was especially sickening was how attractive the idea seemed. I hated Gabriel and his behavior for years. How could I be even slightly tempted to accept his role? The villagers suffered under Gabriel's rule for many years. Now that he was gone, the first thing they wanted was a new tyrant. The old one wasn't even buried. They had a chance to live without being dominated by anyone, but no one seemed interested in it. They obviously needed, perhaps even enjoyed, his cruel tyranny. Was I the only one who suffered? Did they think they needed his tough power, juicy gossip, entertainment? I shook my head in confusion when I felt a hand on my shoulder. Surprised, I looked up and saw Lee, Gabriel's daughter. She had just turned 19, which meant she was 7 years younger than Carla and I. "They're really disgusting, aren't they?" she asked softly. "Yes, I am too." "Why?" It was as if she had touched a jug. I was silent for many years. I didn't care anymore. I closed myself off. But it was all still inside, waiting to come out, even surprising me. Because I idolized him for many years. Because I considered him a father and longed for only one thing: his acceptance of me as a real son. Do you know that some people say he killed my parents? I had long suspected this, but I still craved his approval. How does it hurt? Oh, she just said. Because I just shut down after they brought me into their relationship. Because I kept my mouth shut like all the other hypocrites. All I could do, was divorce her emotionally. My voice rose as long-suppressed emotions flared up again. She just looked at me with her big, innocent brown eyes. Her gaze was open and compassionate, which was difficult to find in that village. She didn't judge me, which was even harder to find. He was a strong man, she said softly, as if that explained everything, and put her hand on mine. It was unexpected. In that moment, it felt like the first time I had been truly touched with genuine compassion. My eyes were suddenly opened to a whole new world that was completely missing from this toxic village. I felt the magic of true compassion and immediately calmed down. You had no choice, she added. Strength does not justify his meanness, I objected. You know, I'm no better. You, Lee, you are the only truly innocent one in this hell. She laughed, sounding unexpectedly bitter, and squeezed my hand tighter. I felt like I was betraying my non-existent marriage by accepting this. How much does it hurt? The moment was magical, but short-lived, and I immediately missed it when she let go of my hand and stood up. Then she did it. She actually smiled at me. It was a sincere, heartfelt smile. I felt myself smile back and was surprised that the muscles necessary for this were still working. After she left me, I became even less able to decide how to deal with it all. Every new piece of news, every turn of events only added to my confusion. Sighing, I went home to my wife, who had been sleeping with another man for years, while I felt guilty about holding another woman's hand. I enjoyed working in the forest for several days. The work was hard, dirty, dangerous, and gave me an excuse to stay away from home and the village. In short, it was a much lesser evil. When I walked to the edge of the forest early in the morning, I used to look back at the village. Nothing moved. The morning fog obscured the streets and made the houses look like islands in a gray, fluffy sea. This village was not just the only home I knew, it was my whole world. I no longer loved this place, including most of its inhabitants. The problem was that there was no alternative. I knew, of course, that there was an outside world. There was always someone in the village who communicated with him, traded goods, and received news. This man, of course, was Gabriel, and no one envied him. The outside world always seemed threatening. From an early age, we heard horror stories about him. The village I was looking at might be a dump, but for me and others, it was a safe place. Like most people, I preferred a known situation, even if it was bad, to something unknown. Sighing, I turned and began the long walk into the forest. Simon, she said uncertainty in the evening. I looked at Carla and suddenly realized how much she had changed since Gabriel's death. It felt as if something solid had been removed from her body. Instead of the confident, sometimes arrogant posture she always displayed, she seemed to have collapsed forever. Even my face became softer. Sometimes she reminded me of a doll without a hand to give it structure. Yes? The harshness that left her body and voice somehow entered mine. I continued to eat the exceptional dish she had prepared. These meals have become the norm lately, and like the constant but always rejected offers of sex, they were a big change in my life. Carla by that time was ready to have sex with me again and sleep in the same room. I still felt divorced from her and didn't want to send the wrong signals or set precedents. She was clearly disappointed but accepted it. Like everyone else, Gabriel taught her the art of handling rejection. Simon, they want to hold a village meeting again. Again? You will go? Why do I need it? Because you're interested. She smiled slyly, and I suddenly saw old Carla, the sweet, innocent girl I was married to before Gabriel showed interest in her. He just took her from me like an apple plucked from a tree. There was not even symbolic resistance on her part. These thoughts quickly drove away the warm feeling that spread in my stomach. She noticed this, and the smile disappeared from her face, replaced by a sad expression. Simon, you should know. She began, but couldn't find the words to finish the sentence. She also missed what we had lost, and she also didn't know how to get it back. "You're right, I'll go," I said, if for nothing else, then to save her from the useless search for ways to do something better. She simply nodded, blinking to keep the tears from flowing. I recorded her emotions, but did not feel any compassion. Too much has happened. Simon. Apparently, Annetta was appointed as the representative. We all know that life in the village has never been easy, but this is the only house we know. I was a little distracted because she didn't say anything significant, and her words reminded me of my own thoughts that morning when I looked at the village. It got me thinking about my day at work until a few key words brought me back to reality. You could count on everyone's support, especially all women, you know. Surprised, I looked at her again. It was as straightforward as village rules allowed. I glanced around to see if Lee was there and sighed in relief when I saw she wasn't. "Yes, Simon, you heard me correctly." She smiled as if she had just found a killer argument that would solve all their problems at once. Seriously, all women? Physically, the offer wasn't particularly attractive, but it spoke to their desperation. It was their own problem. Not wanting to be cruel, I simply ignored their offer and got to the point. "Please tell me, what exactly do you want from me?" My tone wasn't hostile, but it was probably less enthusiastic than Annetta expected. "Simon, you know the village needs a leader. This is how it has always been, and this is how it will always be. One must lead, others must follow. Gabriel was far from perfect, but he never let us down." She was right about that. We could always count on him to be an immoral and cruel bastard. "We all know it's an honor, but it's also a huge burden," she continued. "To make his life easier, we always did everything we could to support him. You know this better than most, since you were among those who made the greatest sacrifices." I felt my face turn red and looked at Carla, who suddenly found something interesting on the floor. "It goes without saying that such support will be available for the new leader," she concluded proudly, obviously assuming it would be me. Otherwise, she would simply offer Carl to another man. Let's be clear. Will I be expected to make the same sacrifices for Gabriel's successor? I knew what they wanted, but I wanted to play with them a little. This surprised her. "Simon, we want you to be that successor." "It's clear. Do I understand correctly that all the privileges that Gabriel enjoyed will also be mine?" "Exactly," she answered with a very pleased expression on her face, as if that stupid child had finally understood something. I expected them to try to lure me into Gabriel's place, but given the importance of false morality in the village, the veiled offer of sexual favors with other wives still surprised me. I looked around at what was on offer. I won't say that women were ugly, but life in a poor rural village leaves its marks, and most of them were proof of that. If I were a polite person, I would say that their bodies were nicely rounded and their faces told stories of difficult lives. Suddenly, it struck me how humiliating this situation was. Here I am, examining a bribe that clearly consisted of a group of plump housewives. They didn't attract me. They were fully aware of this fact, and yet endured the humiliation of my inspection of the goods with brave smiles on their faces. How could they do this? Didn't they have pride? I felt like I lost even more respect for them and the way they humiliated themselves. I should have felt compassion like Lee felt for me, but instead I felt contempt. Damn, I was turning more and more into Gabriel, and there seemed to be nothing I could do about it. "So that's it. Can I choose any of the wives? What do you think about this, Felix? What do you think?" I egged him on. This was, of course, another completely Gabrielian move, but I couldn't avoid it. Felix's wife, Ellie, was the only more or less attractive woman in the village, besides Carla and Lee, of course. He followed the conversation with a painful expression on his face. I wasn't sure if it was because his wife had just been offered to me, or because he wanted to take the position himself. "Fuck you," he hissed, but didn't dare get up. To my surprise, I realized that I was standing in the middle of the room and had no idea how I got there. "What you said?" I responded aggressively, teasing him like Gabriel would do. "Shut up, Felix," Ellie chided him. "It is important." He looked at her, not believing his ears, then at me. At that moment, I realized with complete clarity that Gabriel had also slept with Ellie. I never knew this, which meant she was more reserved than Carla. She had just abandoned this reserve and openly offered herself to me. Her husband's feelings did not seem to be taken into account at all. He clearly realized this because he sank while she maintained her fake smile. Nothing, nothing. I'm fine, he finally admitted. Crap. He also just submitted it to me. This fool. I wanted to scream at them to get their heads out of their asses and find some courage. How could I do this? If I shouted at them, they would only retreat further into the corners. Is this what made Gabriel the scoundrel he was? Was it inevitable? Did this collection of weak, subservient beings inevitably produce a cruel, merciless leader? Crap, I shouted in despair. Their heads, which were lowered, suddenly rose in surprise. Not Felix, really. He was looking at me the whole time. I knew that look. I was in his place. I looked at Gabriel like that for a while, when I still felt that rage when I was waiting for the right moment. As I looked at him, it became increasingly clear that Felix was indeed capable of killing Gabriel. He clearly had motive and enough accumulated hatred for 10 murders. This meant that I was not the only suspect. This had no practical significance, since the murder would never be truly investigated. Unfortunately, this also meant that he would probably have no problem killing me too. I suspected that he would only act if he had a clear, safe opportunity. In the long run, I couldn't avoid it and wondered how worried Gabriel was about someone trying to kill him. If Felix had succeeded, the village would have been his. Again, no one would feel sorry for me or investigate anything. I wondered how many times this part of our village history was repeated. The king died. Long live the king. My death almost seemed like a good thing since it would stop me from becoming something I despised. In despair, I ran out of the room and went deep into the forest to calm down. A few hours later, when I turned back towards home, I realized that I still had no idea what to do, but I had an enemy who had no such doubts. Another dreary cold morning. I'm used to these, but I'm not used to having my head full of unanswered questions. Did I kill Gabriel? They all, moreover, anointed me in his place. Was it even possible to fulfill this role without being a cruel scoundrel? Will I still have to trudge through the mud into the forest and continue to work there? Who will do this if not me? I didn't see anyone who could physically do such hard work except me. Carla tried to seduce me last night. I could be stubborn, but I didn't want her. I didn't want the woman because I inherited her from her late owner. I didn't want sex because she considered it part of her responsibilities. I may have been a hopeless romantic, but I clung to the belief that a wife should love her man, and that should be the only force tying them together. Carla has proven over the years that she sees things differently, much less romantic and much more practical. I always felt at home in the forest. I knew him like the back of my hand, and unlike all the other villagers, he never scared me. He was like an old friend, or maybe like a blanket covering me. On such mornings before dawn, the village behind me was cold, lifeless, and gray. The forest in front of me was a black block, ready to embrace me. Nothing moved except the fog that slowly seeped between the trees. It's good that I knew every path, every branch and root. As I approached, individual trees became visible. For the first time, it seemed that the path led not to a friend, but to a dark womb. Unlike all the other villagers, I never saw the forest as something hostile. It was always my territory. He seemed threatening that morning, even to me. Shaking my head at my baseless doubts, I soon stepped into the familiar darkness. As always, my eyes adjusted to the deep darkness, and things became a little clearer. I could vaguely make out a path in front of me. The only sound was the wind rustling through the trees. The dirt has already given way to the soft, elastic forest floor. This time I wasn't lost in thought as usual. For some reason, I kept looking back. I even looked back like a scared schoolgirl. I tried to catch the slightest sounds. Something was wrong. My back tingled as if someone or something was watching me. Dismissing this thought was as important as it was impossible. Once the mind focuses on something like that, there is no getting rid of it. The harder you try, the stronger it gets. Shaking my head again, I moved on, but continued to look into the shadows on either side. I was becoming more stressed by the minute and had a long road ahead of me. Suddenly, there was a sharp crack behind me, causing me to jump and turn around. At that moment, something hit me on the back of my head, and I fell forward onto soft pine needles. I should have been panicking, full of adrenaline, but for some reason I didn't move. I just enjoyed the smell of pine, which I always loved. I knew this could be the end of me and almost welcomed the thought. I definitely didn't like what was happening to me lately, how I was acting, what I should have done in the past, but didn't, who I was becoming, my options, and my life in general. I felt trapped in this village and in my life, and perhaps what was happening now was the only real way out. He's unconscious, Dad. Good shot. Wait, it's not some mysterious forest monster. It sounded suspiciously like Alex, Felix's eldest son. I think he's already dead, added his younger brother Gregor, his voice full of hope. It was easy. No, this is not the way I wanted to go. Some kind of forest deity or mighty predator, yes. But these three idiots who cowardly attacked me, no, this is not the way I would like to go. We better check to be sure, Felix stated, his voice getting closer. I felt his hand grab my shoulder as he began to roll me onto my back. I tightened my grip on my hiking pole and swung it as hard as I could, hoping that I would hit the sneaky, treacherous bastard. Although I couldn't claim any moral high ground in this regard, since I may have killed Gabriel in much the same way. My stick, of course, hit something hard, but until the swearing started, I didn't know if I had done any damage. Bastard. Dad, are you okay? It sounded like some coward had been punched in the mouth. In almost complete darkness, his sons had no idea what was happening. I used the time to rush deep into the trees, but someone knocked me down and I crashed into the bushes. Crap. Why are his sons so big? Again, I tried to get up and run away when my happiness finally ended. The clouds parted at that moment, and the moon illuminated everything with a bright, cold light. At that moment, I felt another young giant crash into me from the left, and we rolled down, back to the trail. Suddenly, he screamed, and I realized that he had probably received a blow from Felix intended for me. I jumped up again, ready to run away, when suddenly it dawned on me. Why are these boys so big? They are not just tall, they are already pumped up and generally massive. Felix is a small, thin man. The pity I felt for him overpowered my instinct to escape. I just stood there and looked at him with sympathy. Even in the moonlight, my three attackers sensed that something had changed. I behaved wrong. I had to run away now, like prey. What? Asked Felix, probably not having a clear idea of what exactly he wanted to know. You at least suspected it, didn't you? What? What are you talking about? He answered, losing confidence. Your sons. What's wrong with them? He asked angrily, but we both knew. What is he saying, Dad? They are my sons, understand? My. Dad, what is he talking about? His voice sounded a little shrill. The boys probably already suspected something similar. Gabriel, you fucking bastard, I thought. Alex, Gregor, please come here, Felix said, sounding a little muffled. He had probably been preparing for this conversation for a long time, but he certainly didn't expect it to happen while he was trying to kill someone in the dark forest. Listen, you are my sons, and you always will be, you understand? Nothing will ever change that. I couldn't understand the rest because I just walked away, further into the forest, into the solitude that I needed. Hell, these boys just found out that the man they may have helped kill was their biological father. For their own good, I hoped they weren't involved in the murder. What a mess. Again, I was glad that Carla never got pregnant, either from me or from Gabriel. Lee always seemed as if she wasn't made for this harsh environment. Everyone in the village, including the women, was in one way or another embittered by the life we had to lead. Carla wasn't huge, she wasn't fat, but she was strong, physically and mentally. Lee was different. Shy, beautiful, introverted, and fragile. She didn't belong here. She was almost always reading books, and when she wasn't reading, she seemed lost in daydreams. None of the events in the village concerned her. She wasn't interested, and they didn't seem to affect her. She was like a creature from another world, lost in our dirty village, but never participating in its life. It made her somehow untouchable. People tried to stay away from her whenever they could. Her subtle beauty did not even attract the attention of the boys. They were obviously looking for something else, stronger and more suitable for these conditions. Basically, she was a loner, and she seemed to like it that way. I envied her. None of the dirt from that dump could stick to it or stain it. I sometimes thought that if she worked in a pigsty, she would come out clean. Her snow-white dress would remain immaculate. I watched her from time to time with admiration, as if she were the last of an extinct species, too delicate and beautiful to survive in this cruel world. Carla noticed this. "You like her, right?" she asked with a grin. "Yes, in a way I like it," I replied, too tired to explain that admiration doesn't have to be sexual. Carla wouldn't understand anyway. She was already consumed by the filth of the village. For her, everything already came down to sex, power, and necessity. She was practical. Damn, she noticed me. Annetta. I hoped to avoid her, but she was clearly determined not to let me escape. Sighing, I waited for her to approach, but of course, I was not going to meet her halfway. "Simon, it's good that I met you. We need to talk." I simply nodded. There was nothing I wanted from her and nothing I liked about her. She had despised and rejected me when I was a vulnerable young man, and I wasn't going to forget that and make it easier for her. "Simon," she said, trying and failing to sound pleading. I knew she was a cold bitch, and I was just a means to an end for her. Whenever she spoke to me, the only question was what she wanted to use me for. We all know Gabriel had his faults, but he was a natural leader. I simply raised an eyebrow, clearly doubting it. "Simon, we need a physically strong person. This is a harsh place, and it cannot be led by a weak man." "Are you talking about Felix?" I was hoping to torture her a little, but it was Annetta. She was not so easily embarrassed. "Exactly," she exclaimed, obviously glad that she got her point across. "Gabriel was a physical freak. Obviously, there won't be a new leader like him, but you come the closest." I just tilted my head, skeptical. "Simon, I know you've always liked Lee." I didn't feel the need to explain the nature of my admiration, mainly because it was a thought I tried to avoid. I just wanted to remind you that it would be entirely within the rights of the new leader to take her. "Annetta, I'm married, remember." "That shouldn't stop you. Carla knows this and agrees." "Don't you think this should be Lee's choice?" I asked, just to see how far she was willing to go to screw over her own daughter. "No, I do not think so. She has lived in her ivory tower for too long. It's time for her to grow up and do something useful," she said, as if this was just another part of raising her daughter. Shaking my head, I started to turn around to leave when she stopped me by grabbing my shoulder. "Simon, think about what will happen if you don't do this. You know Felix and his sons. You know how much Lee despises them." She used her own daughter as an incentive and to blackmail me. Just when you think they can't sink any lower, they pull a rabbit out of the hat. I stared mindlessly at the horizon for a while, pretending that I was trying to make a decision, but in reality it was due to inertia. After a while, I still wasn't any wiser, and I wouldn't be any time soon. Clearly, it's time to change strategy. Obviously, none of my fellow villagers were interested in finding Gabriel's killer. Perhaps this was something I needed to do for myself and not for them. At the end of the day, I still thought I was better than Gabriel. If I had already stooped to the level where I allowed myself to kill someone, I might as well take over the whole damn village and become the next Gabriel. Sighing, I slowly walked towards the crime scene. The area behind the common workshops looked exactly the same as when Gabriel lay there in the dirt. The ground was just as dirty, and the whole scene just as wretched and undignified. I didn't even know what I was looking for when I saw the hammer. No one even bothered to remove the murder weapon. I don't think anyone knew what to do with it. Probably no one even wanted to touch the object that was used to kill their leader, a man whom I always believed was hated by everyone. I wasn't sure anymore. I still didn't feel anything, but I thought I should. After all, I was the son he never had, right? I tried to remember that fateful night, but still nothing came of it. I almost never drank alcohol and rarely felt the need to console myself with it. By the time Gabriel died, I was almost completely indifferent to what Carla did to him. In my mind, we had been divorced for many years. We just lived under the same roof. Why did I get so drunk that night? Something serious must have happened, something painful. What could be more painful than what my wife did to my ex-stepfather? I still had no idea. I didn't even know if I was physically capable of killing someone while drunk enough to not remember it. I think there should have been a small window for this. Already drunk enough to have lost my usual indifference, but still sober enough to kill a giant with a rather small object lying in the dirt in front of me. I thought about growing up in his house, mostly ignored by Annetta and used as a punching bag by Gabriel. The only bright spot in the dark days was Lee. I always felt the need to protect her from my father's angry outbursts. More than once, when he was in a bad mood and just felt the need to beat someone up, I rushed into the line of fire. It was just as good for him, and he used to beat me until he lost interest. It was one of the few times I saw real emotion in Annetta. She looked truly pleased. I think it wasn't that I saved her daughter from being beaten, but that she enjoyed seeing him beat me. I had no idea why she liked it. Despite the physical pain, I always felt good afterwards, like a hero who saved a pure maiden. As soon as Lee was old enough to understand what was going on, she felt terrible about it and tried to make amends by tending to my wounds. She also started reading books to me until we both fell asleep. When she started writing stories and poems, they were always about brave warriors and beautiful maidens whom they saved from evil dragons. It was a long time ago. There were no dragons in sight. The only one I knew had already been killed. I was still looking at a fairly mundane crime scene with no clues. Not knowing what else to do and still trying to remember, I dropped the hammer and wandered aimlessly around the village, looking for something, not knowing what it was, and ignoring everyone I met. Everyone seemed to respect it for some reason. After a while, I found myself behind Gabriel and Annetta's house. Mindlessly, I stared at their back door. It was just a back door, unremarkable. Still, she somehow attracted my attention. It was brown, needed a new coat of paint, and was always unlocked, like all the doors in the village. Suddenly, I remembered Annetta standing right next to that door. She seemed proud, even radiant. I just finished some work for her or Gabriel. Yes, I fixed the wheelbarrow that was still sitting to my left. I remember Annetta showing up with a cool drink after I had finished. Yes, it was the night of the murder, and I suddenly remembered many things. "Simon, thank you very much for fixing it. Would you like something to drink?" she asked. I ran countless errands for them, but I don't remember a single time when someone thanked me or offered me a drink. I immediately became wary. Such things never happened for free in our village. She clearly wanted something. "Oh yes, that would be nice," I replied, trying to act as natural as possible. Annetta's good mood never boded well. "You know, Lee turned 19, she blurted out. I was completely aware of this. I gave her a beautiful scarf that brought tears to her eyes and left me feeling like I was the only one who took care of her big day." "Yes, I know," I answered warily. "She doesn't know it yet, but we haven't forgotten about her gift. Tonight she will become a woman." "What?" I remember feeling deep sadness. "No, not Lee, please. Don't break it. Don't desecrate the only thing pure in this village." I remember listening to her sing for hours or watching her draw, thinking that she was too good for this dump, too clean to be here. "Yes," she confirmed, clearly happy. I suddenly felt nauseous. "Please, Annetta, you can't do this." "Simon, wake up. This is real life. She can't walk around like a princess all day long, useless and beautiful. It's time for her to start being useful, even if just as a companion to Gabriel." "No, please don't tell me Gabriel is going to." "Yes, Simon," she confirmed proudly. "She's your daughter too, Annetta. Do you care?" I hated letting Annetta see so much of my heart, but I had to do everything I could for Lee, even if I knew I would fail. "Certainly. That's why this will happen. She has no choice, but I'm sure this is what's best for her. Gabriel is a good lover, as your wife will attest, she added, trying to be cruel. She knew exactly what this would do to Lee. She also knew that I knew. It would shatter her into 1,000 pieces, like a fragile glass figurine thrown onto a hard-tiled floor. Annetta seemed proud to sacrifice her own daughter for the pleasure of her husband, and the whole thing seemed so vile to me that I could not stand it. Annetta, you disgust me. She expected this and seemed to enjoy it. I was sure that she saw herself as a strong woman, doing what needed to be done, explaining things kindly to a naive, ignorant man. "What are you going to do, Simon?" she teased me. "She's not even your real sister. You need to grow up. That's how the real world works. Do you really want to fight Gabriel over this?" "Yes, if I have to. It is too. I don't care if he hurts me or anyone else. I definitely won't stand by." "Well, Mr. White Knight, good luck finding them," she said, adding a final drop of venom. I ran away from her, feeling her laughter burning my back. I feverishly searched every house, every place where two people could be alone. Much was not private in this village, but people were still stunned to see me break into their homes, checking their bedrooms. Nobody openly objected, though. Nothing. I ran back and forth through the village, meeting Annetta laughing from time to time. Other villagers I met looked away, perhaps aware of what was happening, but unwilling to do anything. Crap. Finally, I gave up. I returned home and, under Carla's puzzled gaze, began plundering our alcohol supplies. The alternative would be to imagine what was happening right now with a clear mind, and it was unbearable. Soon Carla left our house, probably to go to Gabriel again. She may not have known that he already had another woman for the night, even if she was less than willing. After that, my memories became blurry. Images of me wandering around the village, half drunk, surfaced. The next thing I clearly remember is waking up that morning, suffering from the previous night's drinking, making it to the forest and returning home, where Carla told me that Gabriel was dead. Most likely, I found Gabriel before I got blackout drunk, found the hammer, and killed him with a lucky blow. This conclusion did not make me any better or worse. Lee, I needed to find her. I needed to make sure she was okay. I needed to find out what happened to her. I hadn't seen her much since Gabriel's death and wondered why. Conveniently, I was still looking at Annette and Lee's back door as my memories came back. I tried to come up with an excuse to go into their house and check on her. Fuck this. They want me to rule this village. I can go wherever I want, just like Gabriel. I found Annette first. She was in the kitchen, cutting up some small objects with an absurdly large knife. She turned to me, and I immediately regretted it. She looked at me with her usual fake thin smile and cold, calculating eyes. She was never pleasant to look at. The main difference this time was that she had a huge knife, and I didn't have one. The woman who must have assumed that I had killed her husband changed her thin, lipless smile to a disgusting grin when she saw that it was me. The door slammed shut behind me with a loud thud, making me flinch. Still grinning, she walked towards me, pointing the knife casually towards my stomach. I can't say that I particularly liked this direction. Now I was sure that she would try to kill me with this thing, and I tried to notice objects that I could use for protection without drawing too much attention to it. Hell, I had no idea that Annette might just be waiting for her chance to get back at me. To some extent, I could even understand her, but that didn't make the idea any more appealing. "Oh, Simon, what a pleasant surprise," she said with feigned delight. "Would you like a piece of cake? He's amazing." This was probably one of the most amazing and strange statements I have ever heard. I was glad to see her put the knife on the counter, but I tried not to show it. She didn't seem alarmed that I just walked into her house uninvited. It was hard to tell from her impassive face, but she seemed pleased, perhaps even flattered, by my presence. It's unlikely that she forgot our confrontation in the backyard before Gabriel's death, but there was no awkwardness. She obeyed her husband, the old leader, and had to assume that I killed him. Now she obeyed me, the new leader. It seemed to her and everyone else the most natural and ordinary thing. It seemed that I was the only sane person among a crowd of crazy people, and this thought usually does not bode well. Most patients in psychiatric hospitals probably had the same impression. No, that's very kind, but thank you. The cake looked delicious, but for some reason it seemed stained because she made it. He couldn't have been poisoned because she wasn't expecting me. The only thing wrong with it was how much I despised its creator. You're welcome, Simon. Anything else? She smiled invitingly, starting to unbutton her dress, as if it were the most normal thing when a visitor suddenly entered her house. I should have been happy at the sight of the woman starting to take off her clothes in front of me, but I wasn't. It wasn't because I had just stopped being afraid that she would kill me. The main problem was that I no longer considered her human. Avoiding seeing her naked suddenly became extremely important. Suddenly, I imagined tentacles or spider legs emerging from under her clothes. No, thank you, Annette. This is, very, kind, but don't worry. If you change your mind, take what you want. She took my refusal lightly and began buttoning herself up again. She obviously felt obligated to offer, but was probably used to being rejected. Annette, I'm actually looking for Lee. Lee. She smiled, clearly misunderstanding my intentions. I realized that she probably couldn't think about anything other than the simple patterns she was used to. She's upstairs in her room. Almost doesn't work out if you ask me. Go do what you need to do. It will do her good. Don't worry, no one will bother you. Yes, thank you. I could clarify my motives, but it would probably go over her head, and I really didn't care what she thought. Instead, I knocked softly on Lee's door upstairs. Go away, came the muffled reply. Lee, it's me, Simon. Simon, wait. She opened the door and looked at me questioningly. I found myself studying her face for the slightest sign. Did she see how I killed him? However, she seemed calm, a little distant, but calm. What's happened? Can I come in, please? I want to talk to you. You're not there, too. No, you're not Gabriel. Yes, finally, someone thought that I was not just a replacement for Gabriel, that I was Simon, a completely different person. If she were not already my favorite person, she would have become one at that moment. I followed her into a tiny room that was quite dark, almost empty, but spotlessly clean. She offered me the only chair, and she sat on the bed, looking at me and calmly waiting for me to begin. Lee, do you remember the day your father died? Father? I don't remember having a father. This response would not be so discouraging if it was made in anger. It wouldn't have shocked me so much if it hadn't been said in such a calm, matter-of-fact tone by the sweetest girl I've ever met. She thought about it and meant it. For several years, she was practically my half-sister, my only confidant and friend. Her reading books to me under the dim candlelight for hours was still one of my fondest memories. We were close as brothers and sisters for several years, although the slightest mention of it was beaten out of us without mercy. Practically, this meant that I was beaten while she was forced to watch. Since I left Gabriel and Annette's house, Lee has become increasingly withdrawn, especially since it was decided that I should marry Carla. She was never close to Carla, and after our wedding Lee rarely spoke to her, but I never made a big deal about it. This village has always been full of hostility, and this was far from the worst case. However, we always tried to maintain minimal contact, although that real intimacy was lost, to my great regret. Now that I think about it, Lee has recently become quite the loner. However, she was still as beautiful as always. I still felt this attraction and still suppressed it reflexively. Lee, I know Gabriel was a difficult person. Simon, she interrupted. Polite and modest Lee interrupting someone is unheard of, so sheer surprise silenced me. Simon, we both know he was an insufferable bastard. Despite the persistent look with which she looked at me, I had to laugh a little. Such words were also unheard of near Leah's lips. Well, yeah, now that I think about it. Simon, few people have suffered under his boot as much as you have. Fine. You're right, he was a complete bastard. I see what's happening. I refuse to believe that the people in this village have always been masochistic slaves. What? I believe he shaped them, Simon. He forged them into what he needed, made them need him. Now he's gone, but they're still here. Do you know what's the worst thing about this? They actually miss him. They still need it. I can't tell you how much this makes me scream at night. While she was saying this, she looked at me very seriously. Her eyebrows knitted together in that uniquely cute way they always did when she was very serious. Yes, you are right. They don't miss him as a person, but they miss what he did for them. By what he did with them, really. Yes, exactly. He molded them to fit the monster he was. Now the monster is gone, and all that remains is a large hole in the middle of them. A hole that would fit a monster perfectly. I understand. Now they need a new monster to fill that hole. Yes, I was thinking the same thing, albeit in different words. Simon, they want you to become this monster. I know. I refuse, however. I know, I see that you are trying. But how long will this last? The first step is to despise them. Consider them weak victims. You have already started doing this. True, but so are you. Yes, but I've always done it this way. Your perception of them began to change when they offered you the position of their new tormentor. Yes, did you also consider me a masochistic victim? Yes, we have all been victims, but you and I might be the only unwilling victims here. I sighed. Everything you say is true. None of this changes anything. You think so? They will find a replacement. They want me to do it, but if I don't, they'll choose Felix. Yes, but he's already a bad person. Nothing will be lost if he does this. And you are good. I what? You are a good person. You managed to keep it going through hell, and me too. Don't give up now on becoming the person you hated for so long. I've thought about this a lot. Trust me, there's nothing I'd rather do than take on this role. What alternative do I have, however? I think I have a solution, Simon. I just need to check something first. What you? She interrupted me again, this time with a kiss right on the lips. After a short initial shock, all resistance on my part was forgotten. Carla, who is Carla? She was my ex-wife. Instead, I kissed her back with wild enthusiasm. She simply responded with a muffled moan, which I took as encouragement. We suddenly found ourselves in a tangle of naked bodies on her small bed, and I had no idea how this transition happened. I was too focused on kissing her and finally touching that wonderful body that I had secretly desired for so long. What followed was far better than anything I had ever experienced with Carla. Our marriage was arranged, and we tried to make the best of it. It was a completely different league. Lee and I have always been attracted to each other. We had suppressed it for too long, and that day it finally burst out with a loud bang. We were perfect for each other, and I knew I would never want anything else in my life. The whole day had been completely strange, and her mother added to the strangeness by popping into the room later with what I'm sure she thought was a friendly smile before closing the door again. Finally, Lee said, sighing happily. Lee's smile had nothing in common with her mother's smile. I decided that I would do almost anything to keep that smile on her face, just like that. Yes, finally, after all these years. Finally. Carla. Who is Carla? Do you mean my ex-wife? Fine. She just smiled a very satisfied smile, and I'm sure I looked the same. Did you know that I was supposed to marry Alex? Is it true? I did not know. Do you know that you would marry your half-brother? What? She screamed. Are you serious? Isn't it obvious? Just look at him. Gabriel decided it. I'm sure he knew too. Just when you think things can't get any worse, something like this happens. Of course, but no one bothered to ask me. After his death, my mother stopped this plan. You know why? For me? Smart pie. I'm part of the bribe, apparently. Did it work? She smiled smugly as she said this. No, it didn't work at all. You bastard, she replied, suddenly upset. I want you, Lee, but not as a bribe. I don't plan to give them anything in exchange. Fine. So do we have a deal? Yes, deal. Now you are mine and I am yours. Yes, the way it always should have been. Yes, the following weeks were strange for everyone. Lee and I enjoyed our budding relationship. Not only were we free of Gabriel, who had been tormenting us, but we were finally enjoying something we had wanted for a long time, but had never dared to say. However, the tension around our little bubble of bliss was thick enough to cut with a knife, and it was a constant reminder that the situation in the village remained unresolved. Annette was watching us like a hawk, trying to determine whether Lee's transmission was enough for me to finally accept the dictatorship of the village, or if we were just having fun. Carla was in a constant bad mood, completely ignoring the obvious fact that she had lost the right to be jealous. Her constant attempts to seduce me failed completely. Touching her was the last thing I wanted to do. Felix was also watching us closely. He looked at Lee as an object, as a prize waiting in the wings. He looked at me like a killer looks at his victim, waiting for the perfect moment. In a strange way, this gave me hope because it reinforced my belief that he was not as weak as everyone had always suspected. This made the possibility that he killed Gabriel more plausible, in which case he would be doing me a double favor. He would have killed Gabriel and saved me from having to become a killer myself. In any case, I had no doubt that if I gave up leadership, he would be as merciless as Gabriel. I may have to take on this role to save Lee from him and his sons. Crap. A lot of problems and not a single solution. We were lying in Lee's bed again after making love. Each time we did this, we became even closer and grew together even more. As usual, we did it in Lee's room. As usual, we did this in Lee's room, kindly supported by the smiling Annette. She even brought cookies and drinks from time to time. I felt completely satisfied until Lee suddenly started crying, wet my shoulder. I wasn't the most considerate person, but she didn't seem to be as happy as I thought. Lee, my love, what happened? I asked carefully. It took her a while to stop sobbing and hiccuping, and I knew the right thing for a man to do would be to just hold her and keep quiet. She'll tell me when she's ready, and that's exactly what happened. We don't have a chance, do we? She finally asked. What? Why? Simon, if you become Gabriel's successor, all the women will rush to you. Of course, you will resist at first. You're a good person, at least for now. I just sighed and let her continue as she described my own fears. You will have to make unpopular decisions. You will get used to being respected but not loved. You'll get used to taking what you want. You will get used to the fact that people simply bend under your will, to the fact that people even prosper when you treat them badly. This will affect how you treat me. It won't happen right away, but you won't resist. They will mold you into Gabriel II. She looked absolutely desperate. It wasn't the sweet look she had when she was just serious about something. Her face clearly reflected the hopelessness she was trying to express in words. Her body was tense, and she clung to me like a drowning person. I know. This is also what I am afraid of. They are as guilty as Gabriel. Yes, but what if you don't accept it? Felix will jump at the chance. The village will give him what he wants, and that will include me. You saw the way he looked at me. Of course, we will fight him, but we will not have a chance in the long run. We can't fight against the whole village. We need their support to survive. He might even kill you. Yes, he already tried to do this, I said after a deep sigh. I agree. This dilemma has haunted me for some time. I know, otherwise you would have accepted it already. They want you and are patient, but at some point they will choose their second choice, Felix. I don't know when, but it will happen. Yes, we might not even notice until I'm face down in the dirt with Felix on top of you. Yes, this can happen at any moment. It seems you are no longer called to village meetings. This could already happen. No, if that happened, Annette wouldn't be so proud and happy when I come here and go to your room. You're right, she would have been the first to know about it. Lee, what can we do? I do not see. Stony, she interrupted me. She started making a habit of it, but I didn't mind. What about him? He knew that Gabriel killed Felix's father. Well, at least that's what he told us, yes. It sounded convincing. At least it sounded like he was sure of it. Simon, He knows something. Have you ever thought that we really don't know anything about what's going on here? Why was Gabriel a big man? What happened to Felix's parents? What happened to your parents? Come to think of it, you may be right. There were only two types of people in this village. Those who supported Gabriel and those who are dead. Right, let's go to him. After a few minutes, we realized that our confidence and momentum were left without us at home, and we stood in front of the old, battered front door like scared school children. We looked at each other, trying to decide what to do, when the creaking door made us flinch. "Come in, I was waiting for you. Quite a long time, actually. Glad you finally came," he said, his back to us as he shuffled deeper into the darkness of his house. I took Lee's hand, needing the extra support as much as she did. We probably looked like Hansel and Gretel entering the witch's house. "Sit down," he suggested unexpectedly politely, and he suddenly stopped seeming so threatening. "So you finally come to me," he noted. "It was time. I was already losing patience with you." "What?" I answered stupidly. "Why were you waiting for us?" "Well, that's a good question that will lead to a long story, I think," he said, sighing. "You've already heard the part about how Felix's father and Gabriel fought for the village. The result is obvious, and most of the villagers seemed happy with it, or at least pretended to be so. Your parents, Simon, were not among them. They weren't happy and didn't pretend to be. As Felix's father, they fought Gabriel for a long time. Unlike him, they weren't looking for a physical fight since they had a young son to take care of, namely you. They seemed surprised when Felix's father sought open combat, but were unable to stop him. After the fight, your parents still didn't put up with Gabriel's crap, but they never openly challenged him. They knew they were living dangerously, so your father sent a message to his brother Peter to take care of you if things got bad. Well, they went badly, and we know the result. Your parents were killed, but no one knows the exact circumstances. Gabriel was an evil bastard, but at least he took it upon himself to look after you. Apart from direct kidnapping, Peter could not do much. He's quite rich, and you're his only living relative. He could easily afford to install me here as an observer and support if things really went wrong. He said that one day, if you are smarter than your brother, you will be ready to leave this shit forever. My task is to wait for this day and lead you to it. I was stunned. Wait, what? Leave the village? We've never been outside. Everyone says it's terrible. Gabriel said it was terrible, Simon, Lee said. He never let anyone else look. What do we have to lose? This is our chance to escape and start a new life. Lee, everyone we know is here. Why is this a problem? Is there anyone among them you will miss? This silenced me. She was right. Stoney watched this exchange in silence. Obviously, he did not want to influence us, for which I respected him. What will be your role in this, Stoney? First of all, my name is Max. I still don't understand why everyone here calls me Stoney. I was hired by your uncle to be your observer and guide if you decide to leave. Perhaps this is happening now. It's your choice, however, and I won't interfere. What will happen to you if we leave, or if we stay? This is the easiest job I've ever had. I was paid to do nothing. If you decide to stay, I will ask my boss, your Uncle Peter, if he wants me to stay. I doubt he'll want to. Why? Lee asked. Because I will be lost in this case, Lee, I answered. Peter probably won't pay someone who wants to be like the man who killed his brother. Exactly, Simon. I expect the work to end in this case, which would also be good. The work is easy, but I don't like it here. If you leave, I will show you how to leave and how to find your bearings outside. I think Peter will also support you. I'm pretty sure of that, actually. Let's go, said Lee. Her decision was made. I was still deep in thought. I knew it was the right decision, but it was a big, life-changing moment, and I didn't want to rush it. Max looked at me with his usual calm, confident gaze. I thought about the people I've spent my whole life with. Gabriel was, of course, my main influence. He shaped me, he tortured me, he cared for me, he almost broke me. He was also completely dead, so he wouldn't be a factor. My wife Carla betrayed me, disrespected me, and I doubt she ever loved me. She may not have had a choice, but she clearly didn't resist it much. I already considered her my ex-wife. Our marriage was a simple village ritual, so we were probably never legally married, at least as far as the outside world was concerned. No, I realized that I wouldn't miss her at all. Felix and his offspring, there's no point in talking about them. Our love and respect were so deep that we would soon kill each other anyway. Annette? No, I won't miss the cold, calculating, and treacherous bitch. Fuck them all. Okay, let's do this. Lee's squeal as she jumped on me was cute, but my ear was still ringing minutes later. Even Stoney smiled, and I was surprised that his facial muscles were capable of it. Okay, guys, pack only what you really need. I'll do the same. It's up to you to decide whether to simply disappear or say goodbye. If you want to say goodbye, do it together. It's safer this way. Meet me here in an hour. With that, he simply left the room, probably to pack his things. Lee and I just looked at each other, shrugged, and walked out of the house, still holding each other's hands. First, we went to my former house. No one was in the kitchen or living room, so we went to my room to collect a few things that might be important to me. It looked like a pathetic little pile when I looked at it, but it will make traveling easier. We both looked up in surprise when we heard a faint creak coming from Carla's bedroom. I think she's home, Lee said. Okay, I guess I'll at least have to say goodbye. She was my wife, after all. Not anymore, she replied, hugging me possessively. I laughed and nodded, realizing that I had almost never been hugged in my life. I decided I liked it. We entered her bedroom, and the flashback almost overwhelmed me. There was Carla on her back, and again there was a man on top of her. It was eerily similar to the traumatic day when I first walked in on her and Gabriel. The man was still too young, but I realized that one day he would resemble Gabriel. It was his eldest son, Felix's stepson, Alex. Again, the man grinned at me, and Carla had that strangely, inappropriately interested look again. Again, the man tried to humiliate me with his words. You can't keep your wife, Simon. This time, it didn't work. I think I could, but I don't want to. You can have her, Alex. That's easy to say after she chose me over you. She didn't choose. I was unavailable to her, so she took what was on offer. It really makes things easier. I'm leaving the village with Lee anyway. This seemed to stun them into silence. We were about to turn around when Carla found something she wanted to add. Simon. I turned and looked at her. I just want to say that I'm sorry. She said it in a strangely calm manner, as if we were just interrupting her reading a book and not having sex. You didn't deserve this, but I had no choice. I'm not as strong as you. Good luck and hope you find happiness. I just nodded without a word, and by the time we left the room, they were having sex again as if nothing had happened. Maybe it didn't happen for them. They will remain in this hell without even realizing that it is one. When we left what was once my home, we found Annette proudly waiting outside. Obviously, she was not waiting for us, but for two lovebirds. Oh, Simon, I'm glad you're here, actually. The village chose Alex. You've waited too long. I hope you don't struggle like your father. Don't worry, Annette. It will be as if we were never here. Fine. We. Yes, Lee and I are leaving the village. Oh, I see. With that, she simply turned to wait for Alex and Carla. Lee and I looked at each other, stunned. We knew Annette had always been a cold, unfeeling bitch, but this was extreme, even for her. We weren't expecting a sentimental farewell scene, but it was her only child who was about to leave her life forever. Goodbye, or good luck, wouldn't be too much. Shrugging our shoulders, we walked towards her house, holding hands. At least no one will disturb us while we pack her things. An hour later, we were on our way to a new life. The streets were empty, which was for the best. There was no one there that I would miss, except maybe my good friend, the forest. The journey to my uncle's house took 3 days, and we spent our first night in the outside world in a simple but pleasant hotel. There was never any question of Lee and I sharing a room, and the result was predictable. We were still enjoying the afterglow as Lee's head rested comfortably on my shoulder. It felt right, more than ever with Carla. It seemed as it should be. However, I felt that Lee was a little tense for some reason. I thought about how close Gabriel had come to breaking me. I thought about my growing contempt for the villagers, how I had begun to react to them the same way Gabriel did. Lee was right. It was only a matter of time before I became Gabriel Roman II or died. But Lee was also right that he didn't break me completely. I still wanted to do the right thing, even though the village made sure that I failed. Tonight, our first night on the street, the village and its filth had no power over me or Lee. I knew then that we would have the wonderful life we deserved, and as it turned out, that's exactly what happened. Subscribe to our channel so that your love doesn't cheat on you, and go ahead and listen to the next story, because this story is nothing compared to the next one. If you're under 18, don't even think click to the next one.